In a 60th floor office overlooking the streets of New York, billionaire Elise Harrington stood before Noah Reid, a low-level employee, and coldly delivered the words, "You're fired." No one in the room knew it was only a test, but Noah's response made Elise freeze, changing the way she would see him forever. He didn't beg. He didn't rage. Instead, he looked her in the eye and said something that shattered every wall she'd spent years building. What did he say? Noah Reid woke at 5:30 every morning to the sound of his daughter's breathing in the next room. The apartment was small, a one-bedroom in Queens with thin walls and a radiator that clanked through winter nights. He'd given Annie the bedroom. He slept on the couch. By 6, he was making her breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. Annie sat at the table in her pajamas, hair wild from sleep, coloring in a book while he packed her lunch. She was 6 years old. She had her mother's eyes. His wife had died 2 years ago. A car accident on the FDR Drive. One moment she'd been alive, texting him that she'd pick up milk on the way home. The next, police were at his door. After the funeral, Noah had spent 3 months barely functioning. He'd missed work, ignored bills, let the apartment fall apart. It was Annie who'd pulled him back. One night she'd crawled into his lap and asked if he was going to leave her too. He'd held her and promised he wouldn't. He'd kept that promise. Now he worked at Harrington Hotels and Dining, a high-end restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. He was a server and occasional bartender. The pay wasn't much, but it covered rent and Annie's school tuition. Barely. He picked up extra shifts when he could, sometimes working doubles just to stay ahead. On nights he worked late, a neighbor watched Annie. On mornings he worked early. He dropped her at school before dawn and paid the counselor to let her wait in the library. He never complained. Complaining didn't change anything. By 7:15, they were on the subway. Annie held his hand and talked about her upcoming school play. She was going to be a tree. Noah listened and smiled, even though exhaustion pressed behind his eyes like a weight. He hadn't slept well in 2 years. At 8, he dropped her at school, kissed her forehead, and took the train back to Midtown. He arrived at the restaurant by 9, changed into his uniform, and started prep. The restaurant didn't open until 11, but there was always work to do. Polishing silverware, folding napkins, restocking the bar. His coworkers mostly ignored him. A few were friendly, but most saw him as someone temporary, someone who wouldn't last. He didn't mind. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to provide for his daughter. What none of them knew was that the woman who owned the restaurant, the woman who controlled everything, had been watching him for weeks. Elise Harrington stood in her office on the 60th floor of the Harrington Tower and looked down at the city. From up here, people were ants. Cars were toys. The noise of the streets didn't reach her. She liked it that way. Distance made decisions easier. She was 32 years old and had been CEO of Harrington Hotels and Dining for 5 years. Before that, her father Richard had run the company. He'd built it from a single hotel in Boston into a chain of luxury properties across the East Coast. When he retired, he'd handed her the reins with one condition: prove she was strong enough to hold them. Richard Harrington believed in tests. When Elise was 16, he'd cut off her credit cards without warning and told her to survive on her own for a month. No help, no safety net. She'd worked 3 jobs, slept in a hostel, eaten ramen for weeks. When the month ended, he'd taken her to dinner and told her she'd passed. That was the closest he'd ever come to saying he was proud. She'd learned from him that sentiment was weakness. Trust was a liability. The only way to know someone's character was to take away what they needed most and see how they reacted. Now, as CEO, she applied the same philosophy. The company's year-end employee evaluations were coming up. Instead of relying on HR to conduct standard performance reviews, Elise decided to handle the process herself. She wanted to see who her employees really were. So she devised a test. She would call them into her office one by one and tell them they were fired. It wasn't real, of course, but they wouldn't know that until the meeting ended. Their reactions would reveal everything: who begged, who raged, who accepted it with dignity, who crumbled. Then she'd tell them the truth and explain that their real evaluation would come later. Her assistant thought it was cruel. Elise didn't care. Cruelty was just honesty without decoration. Over the course of 2 weeks, she tested 12 employees from various departments. A line cook, a housekeeper, a front desk manager, a bartender. Each one entered her office expecting a routine evaluation. Each one heard the words, "You're fired," and reacted. Then, after she'd seen what she needed to see, she'd tell them it was only a test and dismiss them. The results were predictable. Some begged for a second chance, promising to do better. Some got angry, accusing her of being unfair. Some cried. Some walked out in silence, too stunned to respond. None of them surprised her. Until Noah Reed. He came in on a Wednesday afternoon. She'd scheduled him for 2 o'clock, between lunch and dinner service. He knocked on her door, and she told him to enter. He was taller than she'd expected. Lean, with dark hair and tired eyes. He wore his work uniform, black slacks, and a white button-down, and he carried himself with a quiet steadiness that caught her attention. Most employees walked into her office like they were approaching a guillotine. Noah just looked calm. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat. Elise didn't waste time. She looked at him and said the words she'd said to 11 others before him. "You're fired." Noah didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, and she thought he hadn't heard. Then his expression shifted, not to anger or panic, but to something she couldn't name. Resignation, maybe. Or grief. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Thank you for the opportunity to work here, Miss Harrington." Elise frowned. That wasn't the reaction she'd expected. But he wasn't finished. Noah looked down at his hands, then back up at her. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost pleading. "But if I really am losing my job today, I need to ask you something. Please don't tell my daughter. Let her believe I'm still trying my best." Elise felt something lodge in her throat. She'd spent years building walls, and this man had just found a crack she didn't know existed. She stared at him. He stared back. The clock on her desk ticked. The city hummed below. Then Elise did something she'd never done before. She broke protocol. "It was a test, Mr. Reed. You're not actually fired." Noah blinked. His face went blank with confusion. Elise leaned back in her chair, studying him. "I wanted to see how people react under pressure. Most beg, some rage. You thought only of your daughter." Noah's jaw tightened. He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't read. Not relief, not gratitude. Something harder. "That's cruel," he said quietly. Elise raised an eyebrow. "It's effective." Noah stood. He didn't wait for her to dismiss him. He just nodded once and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. His voice was level, but there was an edge to it. "I hope you found what you were looking for, Miss Harrington." The door closed. Elise sat in the silence. She'd expected him to be grateful when she revealed the truth. She'd expected relief. Instead, he'd looked at her like she was something cold and broken. It was the most dignity she'd ever seen in another human being. That night, Elise stayed late in her office. She pulled Noah's employee file and read it cover to cover. 2 years at the company. Never missed a shift except when his daughter was sick. Always requested early schedules so he could pick her up from school. Made minimum wage plus tips. No complaints from management. No disciplinary actions. Just steady, quiet work. There was a note in his file from HR. His wife had died in a car accident. He was raising his daughter alone. Elise closed the file and leaned back in her chair. She thought about her own father, about the tests he'd put her through, about the lesson he'd been trying to teach. Strength, he'd said, was the ability to survive without help. Independence was the only true power. But looking at Noah's file, she wondered if her father had been wrong. Maybe strength wasn't about surviving alone. Maybe it was about surviving for someone else. She thought about the way Noah had looked at her when he asked her not to tell his daughter. There'd been no pride in his voice, no ego, just love, pure, unguarded love. Elise had never felt that kind of love. Her mother had died when she was young. Her father had raised her, but love wasn't something he believed in. He believed in discipline, results, control. She felt the weight of her empty penthouse pressing down on her from miles away. The feeling of standing in front of a locked door and realizing you'd lost the key a long time ago. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. "Pull the security footage from the restaurant. I want every shift Noah Reed has worked in the last 6 months." Her assistant hesitated. "Is there a problem?" "No," Elise said. "Just do it." She hung up and turned back to the window. The city glittered below her, indifferent and cold. Somewhere out there, Noah was probably putting his daughter to bed, telling her everything would be okay. Elise realized she wanted to know more about him, not because she pitied him, not because she felt guilty, but because something about him had shifted the axis of her world, and she needed to understand why. She spent the next 2 weeks watching him. Not openly, she wasn't a stalker, but she reviewed the security footage. She read the reports from his managers. She noticed the small things. He always arrived 15 minutes early. He stayed late when someone called in sick. He never turned down a request for help, even when he was already overwhelmed. He treated everyone with the same quiet respect, from the dishwashers to the head chef, and every day, without fail, he left work 30 minutes before his shift ended so he could pick up his daughter from school. One of his managers had written him up for it once. Elise found the report and threw it away. Then she sent a memo to all department heads. Employees with children were allowed flexible schedules, no exceptions. She didn't tell anyone why she'd made the change. She didn't need to. 3 weeks after the test, Elise went down to the restaurant during the dinner rush. She didn't usually visit the floor. She preferred to stay in her office, away from the noise and chaos. But tonight she wanted to see Noah in his element. He was behind the bar, mixing drinks. A couple sat at the counter, laughing. Noah smiled and poured their wine with steady hands. When a server dropped a tray of glasses, he didn't flinch. He just grabbed a broom and helped clean up. Elise watched from the doorway. She saw the way he moved, efficient, calm, never rushed, even when the restaurant was packed. He had a kind of grace she'd never noticed before. One of the other servers, a young woman named Jessica, said something to him. Noah laughed. It was the first time Elise had seen him laugh. The sound was warm, genuine. It made her chest tighten. She left before he could notice her. That night, lying in bed in her penthouse apartment, Elise thought about Noah's daughter. She wondered what kind of child would make a man ask that his firing be kept secret. She wondered what it felt like to love someone that much. She wondered if she'd ever have the chance to find out. The following weeks passed in a strange rhythm. Noah came to work, did his job, and left. He didn't speak to Elise. He didn't acknowledge her when she passed through the restaurant. He was polite, professional, and completely distant. Elise told herself it didn't matter. He was just an employee, one of hundreds. But she couldn't stop watching the security feeds, couldn't stop reading his shift reports. From her office 60 floors above, she observed him through the lens of cameras and manager notes. She watched him arrive early, leave on time to pick up his daughter, return for evening shifts when the neighbor could watch Annie. She watched him help a new server who kept mixing up orders. She watched him cover a bartender's shift when the guy called in hungover. She watched him wipe down tables after closing, even though that wasn't his job. No one helped him in return, not once. One night, she overheard a conversation in the break room through the audio feed. Noah was talking to Marcus, one of the line cooks. Marcus said something about dating, about how Noah should get back out there. Noah's voice came through the speaker, low and tired. "People ask me why I don't remarry. I tell them I haven't met anyone who deserves to be called Annie's mom, and I'm not ready for someone to replace my wife." There was a clatter of dishes, then silence. Then Marcus muttered something about respect, and the conversation moved on. Elise sat in her chair, staring at the speaker. Heat rose in her chest, something uncomfortably close to jealousy. Not because Noah had loved his wife, but because he'd loved her so completely that even death hadn't loosened his grip. She wondered what it would feel like to be loved like that. Wholly, irrevocably, without condition. She'd never had it. Her mother had died when she was 8. Her father had raised her with discipline, not affection. The men she'd dated had wanted her money or her name or the thrill of sleeping with someone untouchable. None of them had wanted her. Noah didn't even know her. And somehow he'd already given her something no one else had. A glimpse of what it meant to be human. She hated how much that unsettled her. 2 weeks later, disaster arrived in the form of a phone call. Noah's neighbor, the woman who watched Annie in the evenings, had fallen and broken her wrist. She couldn't help anymore. Noah had no backup, no family nearby, no other options. He called the restaurant and spoke to the shift manager, a woman named Diane. Elise happened to be reviewing schedules in Diane's office when the call came through. She listened as Diane put the phone on speaker. Noah's voice was tight with stress. He explained the situation, apologized repeatedly, asked if he could bring Annie to work for one night. Just tonight. He'd keep her in the back. She wouldn't bother anyone. He'd find another solution tomorrow. Diane looked at Elise. Elise nodded. Diane told Noah it was fine. One night only. When the call ended, Diane sighed and said something about how hard it must be, raising a kid alone. Elise didn't respond. She left the office and went back upstairs. But that night, instead of going home, she stayed late. She told herself it was to catch up on paperwork. She didn't examine why the paperwork suddenly felt less important than being in the building. At 8 o'clock, she went down to the restaurant. The dinner rush was in full swing. Servers moved between tables with trays balanced on their shoulders. The kitchen roared with heat and noise. And in the corner near the dishwashing station, a little girl sat on a plastic crate, coloring in a book. Annie. Elise stopped in the doorway and watched. The girl had dark hair pulled into a ponytail. She wore a pink sweatshirt and jeans with grass stains on the knees. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated on staying inside the lines. She looked small and fragile and entirely out of place. Noah appeared from the bar, carrying a plate of chicken tenders and fries. He set it down on the crate beside Annie and crouched to her level. He said something Elise couldn't hear. Annie grinned and picked up a fry. Noah kissed the top of her head, then hurried back to the bar. Elise felt something twist in her chest. She turned and left before anyone noticed her. She didn't go home. She went back to her office and tried to work, but her mind kept circling back to the image of Noah crouched beside his daughter, his hand gentle on her head, the way Annie had smiled at him, trusting and safe. At 9:30, her assistant knocked on her door. Elise looked up, irritated. What? Her assistant hesitated. There's a situation downstairs. The little girl. She's sick. Elise was out of her chair before she realized she'd moved. By the time she reached the restaurant, Noah was in the kitchen, holding Annie in his arms. The girl was crying softly, her face flushed and damp with sweat. One of the servers hovered nearby, looking helpless. Noah was speaking to Annie in a low, soothing voice, telling her it was okay, she'd be okay. Daddy was here. But his hands were trembling. Elise stepped forward. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. What happened? Noah looked up. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something close to desperation. She has a fever, he said. His voice cracked. I need to get her to a hospital, but I don't have a car. I called for a cab, but none of them are picking up. Elise didn't think. She just moved. Come with me. My car's downstairs. Noah stared at her. Then Annie whimpered, and he nodded. Elise led them to the elevator, down to the underground parking garage. Her Tesla was parked in its reserved spot, black and sleek under the fluorescent lights. She unlocked it and gestured for Noah to get in the back with Annie. He hesitated. Miss Harrington, you don't have to. Get in the car. He got in. Elise slid into the driver's seat and pulled out of the garage. The hospital was 15 minutes away. She drove fast, weaving through traffic, her hands tight on the wheel. In the back seat, Noah held Annie and whispered to her, telling her she was brave, telling her everything would be fine. Elise glanced at them in the rearview mirror. Annie's head was pressed against Noah's chest. His hand stroked her hair with a tenderness that made Elise's throat tighten. She focused on the road. This wasn't about feelings. It was about doing the right thing. That was all. The hospital admitted Annie quickly. The doctors said it was a viral infection, nothing serious, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Noah sat beside her bed, holding her hand while she slept. Elise stood near the window, looking out at the city. The room was quiet, except for the beeping of monitors and the hum of fluorescent lights. After a long while, Noah spoke. "Thank you, Miss Harrington. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." Elise didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the window. "You would have figured it out," she said. "You always do." Silence stretched between them. Then Noah said quietly, "Why did you really do that test?" Elise turned to face him. He was looking at her, his expression unreadable. She could have lied. She could have said it was standard procedure. But something about the way he looked at her, tired and honest and waiting, made lying impossible. "My father used to test me," she said. She didn't know why she was telling him this. She didn't owe him an explanation. But the words came anyway. "When I was 16, he cut off my credit cards and told me to survive on my own for a month. No help, no safety net. I worked 3 jobs. I slept in a hostel. When it was over, he told me I'd passed. He said it made me stronger." Noah looked at her. His eyes were tired, but not unkind. "Did it?" he asked. Elise didn't answer right away. She looked at Annie, sleeping peacefully, her small hand curled around her father's. "I don't know," she said finally. "I know how to survive. I just don't know if I know how to live." Noah shifted in his chair, careful not to wake Annie. "My wife used to say that strength isn't about surviving alone. It's about surviving for someone else." Elise felt something give way inside her. Not break, just shift. A hairline fracture in a wall she'd spent years building. "I didn't have anyone to survive for," she said. Noah looked at her for a long time. Then he said softly, "Maybe you do now." They stayed at the hospital until dawn. Annie woke once, groggy and confused, and Noah soothed her back to sleep. Elise sat in the corner, watching. She didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. When the sun came up, the doctor cleared Annie to go home. Noah carried her to the car, and Elise drove them back to Queens. The apartment building was old and shabby, with peeling paint and a broken intercom. Noah thanked her again, his voice quiet and sincere, and carried Annie inside. Elise sat in her car, staring at the building. She thought about Noah's words. "Maybe you do now." She thought about her father's tests, about the lessons he'd tried to teach her. Strength, independence, control. But sitting here, alone in her car outside a crumbling apartment building, she realized her father had taught her how to survive. He just hadn't taught her how to live. She drove back to Manhattan, parked in her building's garage, and took the elevator to her penthouse. The apartment was silent and pristine, every surface polished, every corner empty. She stood in the middle of the living room and felt the weight of it press down on her. For the first time in years, Elise Harrington felt lonely. 3 days later, the photo appeared. It was on a gossip website, grainy and poorly lit, but unmistakable. Elise Harrington, CEO of Harrington Hotels and Dining, carrying a child into a hospital in the middle of the night. A man stood behind her, his face partially obscured, but visible enough. The headline read, "Billionaire Elise Harrington's secret child, mystery man spotted in late-night hospital visit." By noon, it had spread to every major outlet. By evening, it was trending on social media. Speculation exploded. Who was the child? Who was the man? Why had Elise kept this secret? Elise issued a statement through her publicist. "I helped a family in need. There is no secret child." The statement did nothing. People didn't want the truth. They wanted drama. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Elise sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by men in expensive suits who looked at her like she'd committed a crime. The CFO, a man named Gerald, spoke first. His voice was clipped and cold. "This scandal is affecting our stock price. We need to contain it immediately." Another board member, a woman named Patricia, leaned forward. "We've identified the man in the photo. Noah Reed. He's an employee, a server." Gerald's expression hardened. "Then the solution is simple. Terminate him. Issue a statement that he's no longer with the company. Distance yourself from the situation." Elise looked at him. Her voice was ice. "No." Gerald frowned. "Elise, this isn't personal. It's business." "I said no." Patricia spoke up. "If you don't handle this, the board will. We have the authority." Elise stood. The room went silent. "This meeting is over," she said. She walked out. That night, Elise sat in her office and stared at her phone. She'd written and deleted a dozen messages to Noah. She didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" didn't feel like enough. "This isn't your fault" felt like a lie, because it was her world that had pulled him into this mess. She thought about calling him. She picked up her phone, found his number in the employee directory, and hovered her thumb over the call button. Then she set the phone down. What could she say that wouldn't make things worse? The next morning, the board sent her an ultimatum: fire Noah Reed or step down as CEO. Elise sat in her office and thought about her father's tests. She thought about Noah's words at the hospital. She thought about the way Annie had looked at her in the car, trusting and small. Then she made her decision. She called Noah and asked him to come to her office. He arrived an hour later. He looked tired, his face drawn and pale. He sat across from her, and she could see the weight of the last few days pressing down on him. Elise didn't waste time. She looked at him and said the words she'd been dreading. "I need you to take a leave of absence, temporarily, until this blows over." Noah stared at her. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "So you're letting them win?" "It's not." "Yes, it is." Noah stood. His voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. "You tested me to see who I was. Now I know who you are." Elise felt something inside her shatter. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. She wanted to tell him she was trying to protect him, that the board would destroy him if she didn't comply, but the words stuck in her throat. Noah looked at her, and there was no anger in his expression, just disappointment, which was somehow worse. "I thought you were different," he said. "I was wrong." He turned and walked to the door. Before he left, he stopped and looked back at her. "You know what the worst part is? I actually started to believe you cared." The door closed. Elise sat alone in the silence, staring at the space where he'd been. She'd lost him. And this time, there was no test to hide behind. Elise spent the next 3 days in her office. She didn't go home. She had her assistant bring clothes, toiletries, coffee. She slept on the couch when exhaustion forced her to. The rest of the time, she sat at her desk and stared at nothing. She kept replaying Noah's words. "I thought you were different. I was wrong." He was right. She wasn't different. She was exactly what her father had made her. Cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice anyone to protect herself. On the 4th day, she opened Noah's file again. She read through every detail, every shift he'd worked, every request for time off to care for his daughter, every extra hour he'd volunteered when someone else couldn't make it. Then she read the part about his wife. Died in a car accident 2 years ago, left behind a husband and a 6-year-old daughter. Elise closed the file and thought about Annie, the little girl sitting on a crate in the kitchen, coloring quietly while her father worked. The way she'd grinned when Noah brought her food. The trust in her eyes when he told her everything would be okay. Elise thought about Noah's question in the hospital. Did it make you stronger? She still didn't know the answer, but she knew what it had made her. Alone. Her father had taught her to test people, to take away what they needed and see how they responded. He'd called it strength, but sitting here, in an office 60 floors above the world, with no one to call and nothing to hold on to, Elise realized her father had been wrong. Strength wasn't about surviving alone. It was about having something worth surviving for. Noah had that. He had Annie. And Elise had taken his job, his dignity, his belief that people could be good. She picked up her phone and looked at the board's ultimatum. Fire Noah, or step down. For the first time in her life, she understood what she needed to do. The next evening, Elise left her office just after 6. She didn't tell her assistant where she was going. She just took the elevator down to the garage, got in her car, and drove to Queens. It was raining. The wipers scraped across the windshield in a steady rhythm. The streets were slick and dark, neon signs reflected in puddles. She found Noah's building and parked across the street. She sat in the car for 10 minutes, trying to find the courage to move. She'd faced boardrooms full of hostile investors. She'd closed deals worth millions, but walking up to Noah's door felt harder than any of that. Finally, she got out. The building's intercom was broken, so she walked through the front door and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled like cooking oil and old carpet. She found apartment 3C and knocked. Footsteps. Then the door opened. Noah stood there in jeans and a gray t-shirt, his hair damp like he'd just showered. When he saw her, his expression went flat. "What are you doing here?" Elise's throat felt tight. She hadn't prepared a speech. She hadn't planned what to say. She just spoke. "I need to talk to you." Noah didn't move. She thought he'd close the door in her face. Then he stepped aside. She walked into the apartment. It was small and cramped, with a sagging couch and a kitchen table covered in crayons and coloring books. A child's drawing was taped to the refrigerator. Annie's bedroom door was closed. Noah gestured to the couch. Elise sat. He stayed standing, arms crossed. "Say what you came to say." Elise looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She couldn't remember the last time her hands had shaken. "I'm sorry," she said. Noah didn't respond. Elise forced herself to look up at him. His face was hard, guarded. She didn't blame him. "I was wrong," she said. "About the test. About everything. I thought I was protecting the company. I thought I was being strong. But all I did was hurt you." Noah's jaw tightened. "You didn't just hurt me. You made me feel worthless. Like I don't deserve anything good because I'm just some low-level employee who doesn't matter." The words hit her like a physical blow. She wanted to look away, but she didn't. She owed him this. "You matter," she said. Her voice cracked. "You matter more than anyone I've ever met." Noah stared at her. The apartment was silent except for the rain drumming against the windows. Elise took a breath and kept going. She told him about her father, about the tests, about the month she'd spent surviving on her own at 16. She told him about the walls she'd built, the fear she carried, the belief that love was weakness and trust was a liability. "But when I saw you with Annie," she said, "I realized I've been living in a prison, and I built it myself." Noah's expression softened, just slightly. Elise reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She set it on the coffee table between them. "This is a new contract. You're not just getting your job back. You're being promoted to Director of Restaurant Operations. The salary is 5 times what you were making. You'll have full control over staffing, scheduling, and policy. You can make the changes you think are right." Noah looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "I don't want your pity," he said. "It's not pity," Elise said. "It's what you deserve. You've been doing the work of 3 people for minimum wage. You've been holding that restaurant together while everyone else took you for granted. This isn't charity. It's recognition." Noah picked up the envelope and opened it. He scanned the contract, his eyes widening slightly when he saw the numbers. Then he set it down and looked at her. "Why now?" he asked. "Why not 3 days ago when I needed you to stand up for me?" Elise felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. "Because I was afraid," she said. "I was afraid the board would destroy you. I was afraid if I admitted how much you meant to me, I'd lose everything. But I lost you anyway. And that was worse than anything the board could have done." Noah sat down on the couch, a few feet away from her. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I don't know if I can trust you," he said quietly. "I know," Elise said. "And I'm not asking you to. Not yet. I'm just asking you to let me try." They sat in silence. The rain kept falling. Somewhere in the building, A dog barked. Then a door creaked open. Annie appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. She was wearing pajamas with cartoon animals on them. "Daddy?" she said sleepily. Noah stood immediately and went to her. "Hey, sweetheart, what are you doing up?" Annie blinked at him, then looked past him at Elise. Her eyes went wide. "Miss Elise," she said. She was suddenly awake. She ran past Noah and threw her arms around Elise's legs. Elise froze. She didn't know what to do. She looked at Noah, panicked. He watched her, his expression unreadable. Slowly, carefully, Elise put her arms around the little girl. Annie squeezed tighter. "I missed you," Annie said. "Daddy said you were busy with work stuff, but I knew you'd come visit." Elise felt something give way inside her. Not crack, not break, just open. She held Annie and let herself cry. Not quietly, not carefully. She just cried. Annie pulled back and looked up at her, worried. "Why are you sad?" Elise wiped her eyes. "I'm not sad, honey. I'm just happy to see you," Annie beamed. Then she looked at her father. "Is Daddy still going to work at the restaurant?" Noah crouched down beside them. His eyes were red. He looked at Elise, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something softer. "Yeah, baby," he said. "Daddy's still going to work there." Annie clapped her hands. "Good, 'cause I like Miss Elise. She's really nice." Noah smiled, just a little. "Yeah, she is." 2 months later, Elise stood at a podium in front of a room full of reporters. The press conference had been her idea. No more hiding, no more silence. She spoke clearly and calmly. She explained what had happened. The photo, the scandal, the truth. She announced Noah's promotion and made it clear that it was based on merit, not guilt. Then she said something no one expected. "I've spent my entire life believing that vulnerability was weakness, that caring about people made you easy to hurt. But I was wrong. The strongest thing I've ever done was admit I made a mistake. And the bravest person I know is a man who asked me not to tell his daughter he'd been fired, because he didn't want her to think less of him." The room was silent. Elise looked directly into the cameras. "Noah Reed taught me what strength really means, and I'm proud to have him on my team." Some of the board members resigned after that. A few shareholders sold their stock, but most people stayed, and the ones who mattered stood by her. 3 months later, on a cool evening in early spring, Elise stood on the rooftop garden of the Harrington Tower. She'd had it built over the last few weeks. A small green space with benches and flowers and a view of the city. Annie was running through the garden, chasing a butterfly. Her laughter echoed off the buildings. Noah stood beside Elise, his hands in his pockets. "She loves it up here," he said. Elise smiled. "Good. That's why I built it." Noah looked at her. "You built a rooftop garden for my daughter?" "I built it for all the employees' kids," Elise said. "But mostly for her." "Yeah." Noah shook his head, smiling. "You're something else, you know that?" Elise looked at him. They'd been seeing each other outside of work for the last month. Coffee in the mornings. Dinner on weekends when Annie stayed with her grandmother. It was slow, careful, but it was real. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance. For teaching me what it means to be human." Noah took her hand. His fingers were warm, steady. "You were always human, Elise. You just forgot for a while." Annie ran up to them, holding a flower she'd picked. She handed it to Elise. "This is for you." Elise took the flower and crouched down. "Thank you, sweetheart." Annie threw her arms around Elise's neck. "You're the best." Elise hugged her back, closing her eyes. She felt like she belonged somewhere. Not in a boardroom, not in a penthouse, but here, with a little girl who believed she was good, and a man who'd shown her what goodness looked like. She stood and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Noah put his arm around her shoulders. Annie held both their hands. A family. Imperfect, complicated, real. Elise smiled. For the first time in 32 years, she felt like she was home.